What's up, friends? I hope you are doing well. I'm recording the second series of State Management course. In this tutorial, we will finish our counter app using Cubit. Before starting to this series, make sure you hit the subscribe button and specify the topics in comments you want me to teach. These small contributions are very important for me to decide how I should manage this channel and create useful contents. So let's get started. Let's look at the counter Cubit state firstly. Inside of this document, there is two classes which is created automatically. The first one is abstract class counter Cubit state, and the second one is counter Cubit initial, which extends counter Cubit state. This counter Cubit initial is the first state for our application. Initial state means there is no data yet, so we are not going to provide anything for our UI. So then we can create how many states we want. Firstly, I will create Cubit loading. Then we can use counter Cubit success. And lastly, we can use counter Cubit error. This Cubit loading means our data is loading right now, and we will provide them after, for example, 2 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. Counter Cubit success means our data is ready, and now we will provide it to our user interface. And the counter Cubit error means there is a problem with loading our data. So we can use this information. We can add some dialogue in our screen and let the user know that there is some issue while loading our data. And here, why we are extending this counter Cubit state. So you will understand this well if we move to the next folder, which is counter Cubit. Actually, the naming is not good enough. Maybe I can rename this one like this, counter Cubit. Okay, just hit OK. And then here I can just say counter, sorry, not for that, for this one. I can simply say counter state. So this naming is just up to you. You can name it whatever you want. And also here, I'm going to change this like this, counter initial, counter loading, counter success, and counter error, just like this. Also, let me change this counter Cubit state. So we need to replace this counter Cubit state in everywhere. And as you can see, there is no error, but we have some errors in this counter Cubit. So this error occurs because this counter state is changed. So let me put this here, and also counter initial is changed. I will put this here. Now there is no issue. So we need to fix this imports. I will delete this one. And inside of counter state, we need to import this immutable from foundation.dart. And this error is gone. Also for the package, I'm not going to use block. Instead, I will use Flutter block. And also for this part, I will say Flutter block. And as you can see, there is no any issue for our application. Now let me explain this counter Cubit.dart file. Here, as you can see, there is counter Cubit class. I will also rename it just like this, counter Cubit. Also, I will rename this just like this. Inside of this, we are extending Cubit because we need to use Cubit features. That's why we are extending this Cubit class. And inside of this Cubit, we just need to define which states we are going to use, okay? And here we are using counter state. And counter state was the abstract class, which we are extending in all the states. But why we are extending this? Because as a state, if I come here and use counter initial, there is no error. In this case, counter loading will not be used. Also, counter success, counter error will not be recognized by Cubit. That's why we are creating abstract class and we are using this as our state. And then Cubit will understand that we want to use counter initial, counter loading, success, and error because all these classes extending counter state. And when we use counter state as the state of our Cubit, basically we will be able to use all of them. These states are very important if you are fetching some data from third-party systems. So if you are using RESTful, in this case, you need to send some request to the third-party systems, and then you will get a response. Inside of response, you will get the data which you need. But in our case, we are not getting anything from third-party systems. So that's why these states are meaningless. We are not going to load any data. We will just have a state value which is 0. So when we click the float in action button, this state will be increased. So that's going to be 1. Maybe then it will be 2, 3, 4, just like this. That means we can just delete the counter state. So I will delete this counter state. And automatically, this counter Cubit.dart file will give the errors. First of all, it will say, which state are you using? Okay, that's the first error. We have deleted counter state, that's why we are getting error. Secondly, it is asking, what is the initial state? We are using counter initial, but we have deleted this. Now, I will do some changes here. First of all, I will delete this import from here. Also, I will delete this import from here. And inside of the Cubit, I will say we will be using integer as our state because the value which is inside of this text will be integer. That's why we are saying that we will only listen to the changes for this integer value. And inside of the counter Cubit, we can put some initial state. And as an initial, I will say I am using 0 as my state value. Now I can start to create method which will increase the state whenever I click to this float in action button. So here I will define a regular function. I will say void increase state. So whenever this function is called, we will emit a state and we will say state plus 1. So what does it mean? This function will be called, means this float in action button will be clicked. And we will emit a new state. Basically, we will provide a new value, which is 0, which is initial, plus 1. If we click the float in action button second time, what is going to happen? This function will be called, and our state is 1 because we already increased that. The value will be 2 because the current value for the state was 1. And now let's use this Cubit. First of all, we need to use block provider to let Flutter know that we are providing values. And secondly, we need to choose in which screen or in which widget we want to provide this value. In our case, we need to provide this value for this widget, which is my homepage. Okay, so what we can do, we can wrap this my homepage with block provider. So which is here, wrap with block provider. Secondly, we need to specify what types of Cubit we are using. Okay, so as a default, this is using block, but we need to change it and we need to use counter Cubit. So just import it. Why we are using counter Cubit? Because we are going to use this counter Cubit class. because the function which is defined is inside of this counter Cubit. Then we need to import this block provider as well. Okay, and the invalid constant value, we need to delete this constant. Also, let's use constant for the my homepage, and that's all. Now our application knows that using counter Cubit, we will provide some value. We will emit some states. Secondly, we need to choose in which section we are going to provide the value. So for this text widget, we need to provide the value. That's why we can wrap this text widget with block consumer, and then we need to define the Cubit. Here I will say, sorry, here it will be counter, and the first one is the Cubit. I will say we are going to use counter Cubit, and the second one is the state, basically the value which we wanna provide. So the value is integer, that's why we need to put integer for the state. For the block consumer, there is two parameters, so listener and the builder. Builder is the one which will build text widget whenever the state is changed. Okay, so when state will change, when this function is called, because we are emitting new state. So when new state is emitted, automatically text that we wrapped inside a block consumer or block builder automatically rebuilt. And as a value for this text, I'm going to use state value. State value is integer. So if I try state here, it is going to give the error because we need to use string. So what I can do, I can use $sign inside of the quotes. And as you can see, there is no any error. We have listener. Right now, we are not using this, but let's check if it is working. And then we will come back to this listener property. And lastly, we need to call this method, because if we don't call this method, otherwise new state will not be emitted and our UI will not listen to the changes. So inside the float in action button, we can call the method which is inside of the Cubit. This is the singleton for our Cubit, and from this we can actually call increase state method. And now let's check if it is working or not. I will restart my application. Let's click to this floating action button. So let's go back to the listener right over here. And as I said, this one is going to listen to the state, okay? That one is not going to build anything in our widget tree. So using this listener, we can show dialog, maybe we can print something. Actually, let me print here something. First of all, I will check the state value, and I'm going to say, if the state value is greater than 5, and let's say state is greater than 5, okay? Now, I will click to the float in action button, and also let me open debug console so you can see printed result. So click to that, and again, I'm going to click to that. And as you can see, state is greater than 5 because this listener is listening to the state value. So the state value is integer. That's going to listen to the integer, which is starting from 0. And when it is greater than 5, it is going to print state is greater than 5.